Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks for joining us on this week's wrap. Obviously, with it being Cheltenham, we've split it into two parts. Tonight's going to be Champion Hurdle and the Champion Chase Day, and we'll wrap later in the week or early next for the Thursday and the Friday action. Obviously, the Cheltenham War starts with the Supreme, and James, Supreme's your race. What did you make of Duvan delivering on the hype?
Oh well, he was very good, wasn't he? He was a bit keen early, but he didn't seem to bother him too much, and he showed a really impressive turn of foot as he came into the straight and sort of left behind one who's probably more of a stayer in Shane's Hill, and Sizing John who'd probably taken on quite a fast pace earlier than he did, so sort of phased a bit late on. But his jumping again, as it had been in his two runs this season, was really good, really quick. And that makes you think like he could potentially turn into a champion hurdle horse, but he's such a tall sort of, arms. They say arms and legs everywhere sometimes, and that's the sort of thing you think of when you look at him because he's just so tall and plenty of filling out to do. And you imagine he'd make a really impressive chaser as well. He looks like he's just walking, looks like he's on springs. So he's got plenty of options and could go either way, a bit like last season with Fahine and Votor. But that was a really smart performance, and I think he's very difficult to beat in the Arkle if he goes that route next season. And given they own Fahine already, I suspect that's what they will do. Shane Hill did pretty much what I'd hoped. If there were any issues with Duvan, if the fast paced and the quick ground were against him, he was there to pick up the pieces, but he had a slightly interrupted preparation. I think afterwards Mullins said he was lacking a bit of fitness, and maybe that just told. I expected maybe to get to the front a bit sooner than he did, but he was well positioned throughout. He jumped well. He was very much dwarfed by most of the horses in the race, so he's not going to be one of those that turn into a top class chaser, I don't think. So he could have quite a fruitful campaign next year when he, in those maybe intermediate distance races, because I think he probably does need a little bit further than 2 miles. But when the pace is really strong, he showed there what a high class operator he is. And at Punchdown, I imagine they'll go up and trip there. And he could be very tough to beat, because I suspect he would have been right there with Windsor Park and the Neptune if he'd gone that route. Behind that, obviously, the home favourite was Lamy Serge. I'd always had concerns about his jumping this season, thinking that at this really fast pace on decent ground, he wouldn't quite be quick enough. And I think that was one of the reasons why he was so far back early on. And that left him susceptible to problems and traffic. And he was obviously unlucky the way Seedling fell in front of him, but essentially he just wasn't quite quick enough over his hurdles to get involved. And then coming down the hill again, obviously he had some plan following his lap, which didn't help. So the way he stayed on was encouraging, and he's clearly got massive ability, but I suspect in a fast run 2 mile race on decent enough ground, he's going to be found wanting. But when it's slower ground, as he showed, or they're going up in Tripod Aintree, I think he's going to be very dangerous, because to finish where he did with all the hampering and the issues he had, and potentially a lack of tactical speed, it's really quite impressive, even though he was soundly beaten. And then behind that, you had the likes of Jolly Allen and Alvicio Ville, who were just two big chasers. And Jolly Allen's jumping it was described as gormless, and he looked a bit clueless before. And again here, he just wasn't good enough, and he couldn't really get involved. But next season, the defence will be better. Alvicio Ville is such a huge horse. He's sort you could imagine not even racing this season, because I couldn't believe how big he was. So probably softer ground and maybe a longer trip over fences next season when you see him at his best. And then Tellus Moore, horse I'd always been very keen on. He probably just lacked the pace and might have been in the wrong race, because he came down the hill 2 out right there, travelling seemingly very well to have a chance, but he just sort of faded away. A bit like he had done, I suppose, in Ireland behind McKinley, but I think he does need that longer trip. And he's probably quite similar to Valsalido in that sense, and could go down that sort of Drim Moor route next season. As I'm sure his jumping suggests, he'll be another really nice novice chaser.
Rory, I know you were championing the home charge in Lamy Serge going into the week. And what did you make of Barry Geraghty's positioning from the off? I got the impression that he was never happy from the flag fall and was fighting a losing battle from then on in.
Yeah, I mean, you can make excuses for him, and he was unlucky in the run, but as James intimates, he made his own luck to a large degree. He's travelled very strongly in his races this season, and didn't really go with any fluency here, which is typical of a few of Nicky Henderson's. who didn't travel but kept on well. They got it right come the end of the week, but I thought he was in an awkward enough position and not really travelling between the first two hurdles. And Barry was at pains to make it work as well as he could from there, which was to take the shortest route and hope he got a good run down the hill, because he knew the horse would stay on strongly. But unfortunately, everything went wrong for him from before the halfway point with seedling, unseeding, and he got caught in the backwash when Sunplan dropped back, and also he was trying to come past Bentelimar. Bentelimar sort of went left and went right as he weakened, and whatever way Barry Geraghty chose to try to make his ground, Bentelimar was there. So he was constantly blocked in his run. But to be honest, on the day, he wouldn't have finished closer than third. It possibly cost him a place. But he's beaten 3 1/4 lengths by Sajan John for that third place. And to be honest, the second and third both travelled a lot better than him through the race. So it's just it's one of those things. I don't think he really gave his running on the day, and it wasn't simply because of bad luck. It was, again, James said, the slightly faster ground, and the fact that he's maybe not as fluent a jumper as one or two of these got him in trouble from an early stage. But it was disappointing to see him not travelling, and the complexion of the race changed enormously after a couple of 100 yards, to be honest. If you'd backed Duvan Antipost and you were tempted to get out of your bed, it would have been cheap to do so, but you similarly would have been tempted just to hold on to it, with your main danger looking to be struggling from an early stage. No reason not to think it was a strong contest, though. Echo what James said about Alvizio Ville. He's over 17 hands. Whether Cheltenham was the place for him to be this season, I think, is open to debate, but he was looked after. Anything that David Casey rides for Willie Mullins generally is going to be looked after over hurdles and fences at Cheltenham, and he was ridden with a view to the future. I think the key to him is probably making the running. Got a big long stride, as you'd expect of a horse his size. He wasn't able to use it when strongly fancied in the Deloitte, and he wasn't asked to use it in the Supreme. I think it was one of those, it was good to have him there. It would help his education, but he could be very interested next season. He's going to develop a lot over the summer. And he could be a different horse next year, and that applies also to Tellus Moore to a degree. 2 miles from fast ground wouldn't suit him. He's a point winner over 3 and bred to stay fairly well, and I think he is another one who could do a lot better next season. Wouldn't be hugely keen on one or two others. Although Sizing John is a horse who's been underestimated, given that the Grade 1 that he won fell apart to a degree with McKinley pulled up and Nichols Canyon falling in that race, but he actually was very impressive in the end. He sprinted clear from the last. He showed that was no fluke by finishing third here, and he'll progress again next season, so he looks a good prospect. I think Shane Sale's run well at two Cheltenham festivals now, but how much long-term scope he has is open to debate, and I think a couple of these will improve faster. But a very, very good contest, and Duvan was a really impressive winner. James covered it off extremely well. He's very narrow at this stage. He's tall, he's narrow, he needs to bulk up a bit. It helped him that it was a smallish field. I think in a really big field where he pulled for his head early, it could have got rough. But this was quite a small field for a Supreme, and that's definitely helped his cause. But now that he's won it, that will have aided his development enormously. He's surely going to jump a fence next season, you'd have thought, and given the power that Willie has in his stable with similar horses, it augurs extremely well for the future for the yard.
Dave, was there any of the horses in behind which impressed you away from the well-distanced winner?
Well, we sort of talked about this with Rory before, and the only one I really want to sort of take out of it, I mean James has covered it off brilliantly, but I thought Sergeant John came out of it with a lot of credit. Did a lot of work, did a fair bit of the donkey work, and sort of helped push the pace, and 3 out really was all go. He's done well to stay up the hill as well as he has done, I think. It has some size and scope about him. I think he'll be an interesting one when he sees the fence next year. Other than that, I mean, there were 1 or 2 disappointments in behind. I thought Kiwi might have run a little bit better than he did, but John Ferguson had a dreadful week in general, and Kiwi didn't really seem to fire. And Jolly Allen, I don't know what to make of Jolly Allen. Again, he's jumping here. He's not. James just described him as gormless. He's been described as gormless, which he just doesn't. he's not bad over his hurdles. He just doesn't see a stride particularly, and he's not fluent. So he's losing half a length at every hurdle. He's got, it's not a bad technique, but you certainly couldn't describe it as a good one. Whether he's going to pay more attention to fences remains to be seen. I think for me anyway, the jury's out a bit on Jolly Oliver at the moment.
Paul, obviously Mullen started the day well with Duvani. Do you expect him to follow up in Undersaw's footsteps in the Arkle next year, and you want to lead us into the Arkle itself?
Yeah, well, as Rory said, I would expect, given the ammunition that's already in the yard, I would expect Duvan to go straight over fences, especially given his size and scope. I think the lads have covered the race off really well. Touching on Shane's Hill, James said he might go up and trip. I was thinking he's only won one race, so I know there's the winners of one, novice hurdle at Punchestown over 2 miles. I would have thought Willie will probably pencil him in for that and send Duvan to the Grade 1. Again, obviously over here, I'd echo what the gents have said already. He was a real eye catcher in the pre-parade ring in terms of long-term prospect, and certainly one for fences. And again, what was said about Lammy Search, I'd probably expect him to step up to 2.5 at Aintree. Possibly it was the quicker ground, is jumping on the quicker ground, but you would have expected. I didn't expect it to be as much a problem being by King's Theatre, but possibly he was getting, just as jumping early on was getting him caught run off his feet. I think over an extra half mile around Aintree, I think that'll bring, he should level him out into play with that terms, I think, and he'll still have the speed. He'll probably be the horse to beat in that, as he won with Spirit Sun. I think he stepped up after finishing third in Supreme a couple of years ago. Moving on to the Arkle, pretty uncomplicated really. I'd say that was what I'd describe about the ride. Ruby gave to it Undersow. I'll keep it uncomplicated myself. I was actually slightly, might sound silly to say at the time, I was slightly underwhelmed by the performance. Turning Throne, the God's Own loomed up alongside them, but I think having looked back on it, I think that was a bit harsh on the runner-up, and B, as soon as I got home and watched the rerun, the winner was more impressive than I actually gave him credit for at the time. Possibly that was the fact that backed him anti-post. I was slightly nervous watching the race when I shouldn't have been, but I think Ruby knew from the flag fall, if he was able to settle him early, it was well documented beforehand. If he was, the worry was about him getting buzzed up early, but that didn't happen. He settled nicely, got into a nice early rhythm, and I think it was basically a case of he knew if he jumped round he'd win from that point, and he did keep it uncomplicated, and he didn't really need to wind him up or ask him for anything silly, and he won the race pretty much as he liked. I say the runner-up, he ran much better than I expected, to be honest. Returning to better ground, as Tom George had hinted at that he would improve. A couple further back that I liked the runs of. I thought Sergeant Reckless, I thought his lack of experience told early on. He was struggling in his first couple of fences and got left behind a bit, leaving out onto the back straight, but I thought he ran on reasonably well, and he'll probably be well suited by Aintree, as will Court Minstrel. He travelled well out the back, as you'd expect. Never really got into it and looked like being involved, but he ran on late on. And again, I think the track at Aintree will suit him. I would assume both of them will go for the McGull Novices Chase, although I'm not sure what they've done with Court Minstrel's mark this week. Did he alter it at all, Dan?
I'll have a look while we're talking on the race. I echo your point there about at first glance I don't think it was that impressive. Is there a bit of a mystique around Undersaw where he gets the impression that he's going to go off always too fast, that no one's going to lay up with him, period, and he's going to get it his own way for the rest, well, not for the rest of the season, but possibly the majority next as well?
I thought I actually, if you'd have asked me my personal opinion before the race, I would have thought he would have won by further than he did, and that sounds a bit silly talking about a Grade 1 at Cheltenham, but as I say, I think it was just a case of he settled so much better than a lot of so-called experts or the knockers thought he might, and he thought that would have been an issue early on, but it wasn't, and he got into an early rhythm, and just think he did keep it uncomplicated, Ruby, and he just wanted to make sure he jumped from fence to fence, and there was no real need to wind it up from he didn't really ask him to go at all until just turned into the straight, and I'd say that'd be the term I'd use, uncomplicated.
Dave, obviously a Cork Minstrel fan, as Paul mentioned there about his handicap mark, he's still being left off 151. Would you be looking at open company, novice company again with him, or would you have a look at I think it's the Red Rum chase, isn't it, Aintree?
I would be looking at the Red Rum all the way. I think had it not been for the mistake 3 out, because at that point he was travelling as well as anything in behind, certainly, and he'd not been asked for any effort. He lost more ground than you think at that when you watch it back. I knew he'd lost ground at the time, but he's lost ground and impetus at a key moment. And then unfortunately, then he's struggling to get back. Look, I'm not saying he's a bridle horse, but he does all of his better running late in the day on the bridle. He's come up the hill well enough. I'd be, it was the first one to sort of catch my eye in behind. I'd had a little bit each way on him for the race anyway, and I was sort of seeing how well he was going. I think he's still got much more to offer this spring. A mark of 151 will stay. For me, as I say, he would have been very, very close to being in the places, I think, had he got 3 out right, and that certainly makes him look still well handicapped off that mark. I'll put my bit in the under. So I thought I was really impressed with him. I know exactly what Paul's saying. We sort of wanted him to come out and do what he's been doing and demolish a field again of good horses. But actually, again, he's impressive for a different way, because this is a different under. So he's constantly being asked by Ruby, I think, throughout the race. Just every now and then, he just asks him for a little bit more, puts his foot down for 100 yards, and just takes another length. I mean, if you're watching when they go past the Tans first time, when Dunraven Storm comes to have a bit of a go first time around, the other front runner in the race, and you think, oh, now this could be interesting. But actually, that's at the third, and by the time they've reached the fourth at the top of the hill and jumped that, he's seen Dunraven Storm off him. He's 4 lengths in front of it, and that's because Ruby's just asking him again. Right, okay, all right, we've got competition. Let's go, and it just takes 3-4 lengths out of good horses. So he was constantly asking him throughout the race, rather than just like one big effort from the word go, and he was trying to sort of fill him up every now and then go again. I think it's a really impressive performance. The more I watch it back, the more I think it's a very impressive performance.
One of the things which did surprise me, Rory, when I was looking back at the race and the in-running market, that Undersaw actually hit 5.6 in the run. Did he ever look like 5.6 to 1? 4.6 to 1 shot for you in the race?
No, there was a moment between the last 2 fences when you thought. I think there's a misunderstanding and a general belief about him before this race that all he could do was blaze, and once he was caught, that was him finished. But that's a notion not backed up by what he's done on the track before. No one seemed to look at his French form. He ran over 2 mile 3.5 at Auteuil and beat Gemix by a short head or a short neck, where he clearly didn't stay, but he battled to hold on that day. And the interesting thing was, Ruby was asked about this after the race, and he said, when I felt him coming to me at Auteuil, I asked him to kick on, and he produced in front, but he's only got 1 extra run once he's made the running. And he said, I knew that he would do that, but he was then hanging on at Auteuil, so I didn't want him asking for that effort before the last fence. So he sort of gathered him up after the second last. I think a lot of people looking at Ruby's body language might have thought, hold on a second, he's not asking the horse here. Is it because he doesn't think he's got anything underneath him? And I think, there was a point where you thought, I'll tell you what, Godzone's going to win this for about half a second. But then when Ruby did shake on the snow up, he found plenty to go clear again. But you could tell from the way Ruby did that he was aware of what had happened in the past, and he was just trying to maximise his chance of nothing going wrong. He hasn't won with absolutely tons in hand, but he's just an exceptional talent. And it would be no surprise to see him going in a champion chase next year. I thought he'd win by further than 6 lengths. I know Paul has touched on this as well. But again, Ruby rode him to do exactly what he did. He wasn't there to break records. He wasn't there to show that this was the best horse we've seen in 20 years, and he was never going to be the best Arkle winner we've seen in God knows how long, because Sprinter Sacre was only 3 years ago, and you don't get any better than that. So it was just a case of this horse needs to win. It's his first time at Cheltenham. He needs to learn how to do it properly as well, and Ruby rode him absolutely to the letter. It was an exceptional ride, despite the fact that he's clearly an exceptional horse as well, and it's easy to say, well, anyone could have won on him. But it wasn't just a case of winning on him, it was a case of making sure that everything that happened in this race built towards his future. And I thought Ruby did that really well.
James, of the beaten horses, was the confidence to be taken out of Joss's Hill performance, or was it purely his class and his engine which got him into third place?
Yeah, I think that's quite a good summation. I think he doesn't really jump like a 2 mile, does he? He's very deliberate, and he put it in his now sort of typical jump from way off, way sort of 5 or 6 strides before the fence almost. I think it was the first open ditch he took off so early, but he managed to avoid landing on it. And he always throws one of those in. And if he avoids doing that, he can be useful. But he was basically always going too fast. And you have to think that he's going to step up and trip next season, if not this season. And, as a novice hurdler, I sort of he did remind me in how he looked of Sprinter Sacre, but certainly not going to be anything like that. He's probably going to be more of a Riverside Theatre, because you can imagine him coming back next season in something like the Ryanair and Geraghty, working hard from flagfall at every fence, just trying to clamber him over. But the way with his class, and I think he does stay. He could end up being competitive in that. But essentially, he needs to really sharpen up his jumping and quickly, because I think this race did really fall apart behind the first 2, because horses couldn't really handle what Underso was doing. But he managed to get there, but his jumping is just still not right. And there's a chance it'll improve, but you have to worry, and I think you have to have Geraghty on him all the time to make sure it's absolutely ideal, because jockey without his talent could struggle, I suspect.
You mentioned there about the horses struggling behind him. Was it the fact that Godzone was actually a second season novice here, which was probably more benefit, because he's obviously competed in more graded chases in the UK, and obviously I think he was in the Tingle Creek early this year, a bit more streetwise about him, and actually be able to cope with some of Undersaw's talents.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I certainly underestimated him. That Haldon Gold Cup form was pretty good, and I basically dismissed him after his struggle through the winter. But on that quick ground, he's clearly extremely useful. And he got the ride, a really good ride. He got the ride that people were sort of talking about, giving horses against Underso and just staying away from him out the back, and then gradually making up ground, and then getting there as late as he could. And he got there as late as he possibly could to really challenge Underso. And as guys have said, he offered a threat, but essentially he wasn't as good as Underso, because so few horses are. I think Santos and Davis was talking about doing that, and others were talking about doing that, but they either weren't quick enough, or in the case of Vibrato Valtat and Santos and Davis, I think they would probably just lack the patience. But it was a really good ride, and with his experience and the ability that I probably didn't credit him for, he's done extremely well.
Another one who got an uncomplicated ride to win a Grade 1 was the headline of the day in the Champion Hurdle in Forheen. Rory, was it disappointing to see how the race unfolded, with Ruby Walsh pretty much having his own way, or looking back at it, was it always going to be a case of that was what it was going to be?
Yeah, I think it didn't pan out massively differently to what I expected, to be perfectly honest. Ruby, again, was terrific from the front. It was a slow time compared to the Supreme, but that's not unusual these days. The Supreme often throws up a faster time than the Champion Hurdle, because it tends to be a very honest pace throughout, whereas in a few recent Champion Hurdles it's been a case of one horse being able to dictate, and sometimes being good enough to win and sometimes not. And he didn't blow you away, Forheen, in that everything really went his way. If you didn't know an awful lot about him, you'd have argued that he might have been flattered by the winning margin, because Ruby was able to set the fractions he wanted. He's then quickened decisively after the second last, but did appear to be all out to Old Arctic Fire in the end by a length and a half. I'm not sure that tells you the whole story. It has to be said. His jumping's not perfect, but the way I looked at it before this race was, even when he was wrong at a hurdle, he was very quick over it. You know, if he needed to kick it out of the way he did, he tended to be faster from one side to another. But he did lose the back legs over the second last hurdle, and it's just the worst time in the race to lose momentum. And he definitely did. And I think a lesser horse would have lost his position quickly then. And I thought it was impressive how quickly he regathered himself and beat off both the new one and Jetski, who were breathing down his neck at the time, and left them for dead. And again, there's no excuse for those two, the way the race panned out. You could argue, I heard one or two people argue that they were asked to do too much too soon, but when you consider how the race was run, the only issue with them was that they tried to put it up to Faugheen, they eyeballed him, and he happened to win that psychological battle. In terms of how they ran their race, they should have finished it off a little bit better. Arctic Fire was essentially ridden for a place, but kept on well into second. I heard Danny Mullen suggest afterwards that his instruction almost was to challenge after Hurricane Fly. So the game plan was Ruby would make the running. Paul Townend was to throw down a challenge on Hurricane Fly if he could before the last. And Danny Mullins was to hold out Arctic Fire until the last moment and produce him with a challenge halfway up the run-in. And Danny felt that if he was allowed to make his challenge earlier, because he travelled best, aside from Faugheen, he travelled best in the race. Travelled really sweetly under restraint. But the issue with him, of course, is that he doesn't have too many wins on his scorecard, does he? Travels very strongly in his races, but he's not one you'd trust if he was out in front for any length of time. So I think the instruction was probably correct, that he wants to challenge as late as possible, and I suspect if he got to Faugheen a little bit earlier, the winner would have found a bit more and would have been tougher in the finish. But no real argument with the result. I think Arctic Fire was the underrated horse coming into it. He was second in the Irish Champion after all, and it's just a case of how you continue to rate Hurricane Fly. I thought that was an absolutely first-class performance from Hurricane Fly to win the Irish Champion, and therefore Arctic Fire ran a career best to be second coming into this. So he probably shouldn't have been a 20-1 shot on the tail. That's easy to say after the event. The new one had worried me coming into the race. I had this debate regularly with Dave about his jumping. Dave thought he was, like a lot of people, thought he was a stone bonking each way bet going into it, at sort of the pre-race 4-1. But he started to look after himself in his races. I think if he's going to get back on track, the new one, he needs to wear blinkers or some kind of headgear, because he needs to concentrate more on what he's doing, and he's just being a little bit careful of himself and trying to make sure that nothing nasty happens to him. Whether it's something that happened in this race last year when obviously getting caught up with our Connor's fall, but throughout that race after the incident last year, he was slow at his hurdles, careful at his hurdles, and he was definitely that way at Haydock again. So if he's going to win anything decent, they've got to get that out of him, and I think the best way of doing that is putting headgear on him. But he might find that there are more progressive horses coming through now anyway, and it's going to be difficult for the new one to hit the heights of the Grade 1 hurdler.
You mentioned there about headgear. I think going into the race you were on about the headgear, possibly the effect of the headgear wearing off Jetski. Do you think that was the case here, or is it just that's where he is?
Well, again, the point I made about Jetski coming into this was he's a horse who's probably got away with murder since winning the Champion Hurdle last season. It's very easy to knock the form now, and it was easy at the time. He beat My Tender Years all out by a neck in a race where plenty went wrong for the others. And he's then been beaten 4 times this season now by Hurricane Fly. But everyone almost wrote off those defeats and going, well, yeah, this happened last year. He always comes alive at Cheltenham. He's had 4 runs at Cheltenham now and 1 win. He doesn't come alive at Cheltenham. And the hood definitely helped him last year. But for me, a hood is always going to be a temporary aid. The longer a horse wears a hood, the less effective it's going to be. If you go back to an article that Richard Hughes wrote in the Post last year, not liking horses are hooded because he feels that they're somehow not competitive. And if they tend to be too free, then a hood will help first time, because they will it will curb the negative aspect of the way they run, but it will never bring in a positive aspect. And that's the issue with the ongoing use of a hood for a top class horse. I'm not sure that. I think you end up taking a little bit of the competitiveness away from horses. And Jetski comes from a family who've all been very talented, but some of them have trained off reasonably early, and he's got a little bit to prove now after disappointing finishing efforts in his last 2 starts.
Paul, with the likes of Duvan possibly going over fences, and James mentioned earlier about the size and scope of Shane's Hill, is there anything for Faugheen to really worry about, considering Arctic Fire might be become a bit of a globetrotter now? Paul?
No, well, if Duvan certainly goes over fences, then obviously Shane's Hill could go down that route, but again, he's from the same stable. I wouldn't think there was much else in the Supreme. We'll touch on the Neptunes. Windsor Park, the winner of that, you don't know which way he'll go. He'd probably go on the flat at some stage for them at Weld. So no, I'd be amazed if Faugheen was switched from hurdles to fences at this stage after that win. Arctic Fire still, as Rory said, he's continued to improve through the second half of the season, and it was interesting what Patrick Mullen said in an interview beforehand, saying he wasn't sure he was training them in the right way in the first half of the season. The races, the likes of the Fighting Fifth and things, and since then they've really got stuck into him. I know Willie said the same after Vator's win on Thursday, that the last 3 weeks prior to the festival they had to get stuck into him. But he said it, apparently they've been doing this for a couple of months, and he's blossomed Arctic Fire since the change in regime, and he's just a horse that takes a lot more work. So yeah, again, he was probably, as Rory said, he was probably underestimated going into the race. And he could well continue to improve, but he was pretty much in a similar vein to Undersow. I just thought Ruby was in complete control throughout. Again, I'd echo what Rory said about the new one. He seemed to be certainly holding back for himself something, or he even looked like he veered off a straight line to me coming down to the foot of the hill. So yeah, I thought the winner was the best horse in the race, and he was well positioned right throughout to dictate, but he still won on merit for me.
Dave, I know, as Roy mentioned there about the conversations you've had with Rory going around, revolving around the new one. Where would you look at next season for him? Is there anything this season? Can you see him winning the entry hurdle again this year?
Well, that's going to be the obvious target for him, I think. He just looks now. I mean, I've been prepared to give him the benefit of the doubt this season, I think, when perhaps in retrospect, I probably shouldn't have done. As Rory says, he's perhaps been a bit careful this year with his hurdling. And I think, and again, an early mistake here didn't help his cause, did it? He's clattered the second and he's out to his right, and immediately he's into retreat mode, isn't he, almost? I just don't, watching it back, I just wonder now whether he's it's a stupid thing to say that a horse hasn't got the speed for 2 miles that performs as well around Kempton as he does. He obviously does have some speed, but he seems to only be prepared to show that speed under certain circumstances when it all drops right for him. He was taken off of his feet here, I thought. I think they've got to step him up next year to 2.5. I think they have to look at stepping him up in trip. Entry hurdle this year is the obvious one. I mean, there is talk, isn't there, already, of another race at the festival, and a 2.5 mile championship hurdle race would look like the natural thing to put in. We've had the Ryanair, so it's there for the chasers now. We should be putting a championship race in over 2.5 miles for hurdlers as well, and that would, should such a thing occur, that would be a blindingly obvious target for him, you would imagine, next season. But he just headgear. I know Roy's mentioned it. I don't know. I'm at a bit of a loss now with him. I really thought he'd run better than this, and he was very, very disappointed. I thought he ran flat, and he was flat out almost from the second from the word going. He just couldn't keep with him. So a disappointing effort, and I think we've got to step him up in trip.
James, and I think we'll touch on Hurricane Fly. I'm talking to you. Obviously, connection to thinking about going for the I think it's a French champion hurdle, which might be over 3 miles for him. Obviously, there's every chance that he's going to get his easy ground, but to post a performance like this and beat last year's champion hurdler, even though that might not have put in the same performance as last year's when he took the crown, there was a lot to like about the performance of the 11-year-old Hurricane Fly.
Yeah, there was, and it was quite good to see him confirm that form of the jet ski that everyone assumed would be reversed. You know, when he came into the straight, he was going quite well really, and I thought he was going to end up being a good second, but he just lacked the younger, probably now quicker legs on that ground to Arctic Fire. But he plugged on well into third, and he's such a consistent, admirable horse. He's really easy to like, and I think going to France and looking for that softer ground is what he needs, and if he can stay that extended trip, then he's obviously going to be very, very dangerous there. And I don't see why we couldn't have another season in Ireland, you know, avoiding Fahim winning plenty of those decent championship races over there, because he's still clearly got the ability, and Willie Mullins knows what he's doing to keep him sweet. And it was just nice to see him run so well. I think that the Mullins plan worked particularly well on this day, didn't it? Because they knew Fahim was going to be very difficult to keep up with, and Jet Ski and the new one were burnt off, and Arctic Fire and Hurricane Fire just waited for them to actually move out the way, and they came through and picked up the pieces. But it was a very, very, very good run from Hurricane Fly, and it was great to see.
Paul, obviously there's a fair bit of action on the day away from the championship races. We had Annie Power trying to complete a hat-trick for William Mullins and Rich Ritchie in the Mares Hurdle. I think she traded about 1:20 in one before falling at the last. No doubt it opens a bit of wounds for you, Paul. But as well as the Mares Hurdle, what were the performances on the rest of the Tuesday's cards took you high? Is there a delay on Paul's feed? Must have frozen. Go on then, we'll go to you, Dave. Mares Hurdle, Polly Peacham, you had your each way double with any currency I think you collected on that one. But what did you make of the Mares race, and was there any other performances on the Tuesday card which made you stand up and take notice?
The Mares race is actually quite an interesting race, I thought. Obviously, we're all very sorry that Annie Power didn't get the chance to win the Grade 1 that she deserved. Sort of step at the last. Interestingly, I was talking to young Francesca the day after, who was one of the official photographers at Cheltenham, who has a theory on it. Interestingly, she's got a photograph of Annie Power trying to jump the last. She thinks that and I haven't seen the photo yet, so it'll be an interesting one. But she thinks that she's tried to jump the shadow.
Oh, that's old news. We had the shadow theory. We've blown the shadow theory out of the water. We've brought it back up again. We've discounted it. Old news, Matthew. Keep up.
Well, I haven't seen it. So there. Okay, so all right. Taking that aside, yeah, Polly Peacham. Another one of the Henderson horses not to travel. Just didn't travel at all throughout the race, did she? I expected to travel much better than she did on ground that was suited. Got the pace that she needed, and yet she was, one of the first ones really that looked in some sort of trouble. She couldn't hold a position at times, but it's to her credit how well she's fought on up the hill actually, and a good ride by Barry Geraghty. She's in front before the line. I swear she's in front the stride before the line. And she's in front after it, but she ain't in front on it, unfortunately, for me. But the interesting one for me is a bit of a puzzle. Who on ground that's arguably a little bit too quick for her, and over a distance that's arguably a little bit too short, an absolute cracker, absolute stormer. Reversed form with the Pirates Queen from earlier on in the season, which perhaps you may not have expected on this ground. I don't know. You can argue the case. But I thought it was a really good run from Bit of a Puzzle. He kept fighting all the way up the hill, and got to step up. She's got to be a world hurdle candidate, I think, next year, given the way that's panned out this year. Love to see her stepped up to 3 mile, and perhaps she'll, we've seen here that she'll go fine on good ground. I think she's an interesting one for next year. I really do.
And was there anything in the handicaps which, obviously we're going to get to Rory and his Irish Cavalier shout a little bit later, but was there anything in the handicaps to the 3 mile for you which took your eye?
I'd given a mention for the Druid's nephew earlier on in the day. I was doing a bit of a piece upstairs in the restaurant. I'd given the Druid's nephew one that he possibly would be of interest in the 3 miler, and he's threatened to do that for a season or two. I think Druid's nephew, and he's travelled like one of the best horses in the race, and I was pleased to see him win. There was some disappointments in behind again. Pendra now, I think you've got to, even the most sort of hardened Pendra fan, I've got to say they've got to give it with him now. A bit more from Indian Castle in behind as well. Probably first I think he's shown some form for a while, and Black Thunder as well on the top right. He falls between 2 stools now, Black Thunder. He's difficult. He's going to be very, very difficult to place. He's got plenty of talent, Black Thunder, but he's going to be extremely difficult to place, I think, next season. But we'll let Rory talk about Irish Cavalier, because I know he was pretty sweet.
Come on, Rory. I think in the preview which we did, you were talking about, I think Generous Ransom was about the 8-1 price, and Irish Cavalier was double at 16 to 20-1. Paul Townend started the week off with nailing one for Rebecca Curtis, didn't he?
He was probably the rider of the week, Paul Townend. If you consider the horses he rode all week and the results he got from it, certainly if you backed him blind, you came out well ahead. But he ended up with 3 winners and 2 or 3 placed horses, mostly at decent prices, and he gave Irish Cavalier an absolute peach here. It was no good thing going into it, but as I said on the preview, he was 20-1 the weekend before, and that's just because no one really pays attention to the anti-post handicap markets. If you just looked at the race where he finished behind Generous Ransom, I thought that was it's always a really informative novice chase, the Timeform Novices Handicap at Cheltenham in January. The Generous Ransom won it, and Stellar Notion also ran on this. He went off too hard, but he's clearly got a bit of a problem, hasn't he, Stellar Notion, because he finished last again. But Generous Ransom got the run of the race and won that day, and Irish Cavalier ran on really well to be placed, was better off at the weights, was more likely to be suited by faster ground as well, and duly turned the form around. He was no good thing, because these handicaps are really competitive, and if Irish Cavalier had been the price that Thomas Crapper was and vice versa, I'd have been all over Thomas Crapper, who finished second. But he was, for a horse who'd been operating theoretically under the radar, everyone in the world spotted him, didn't they? I really liked him last season. I remember putting him up for either the Coral Cup or the Martin Pipe at 33s as the kind of handicapper that no one would notice, and he finished second in the Martin Pipe. And I kind of hope we get the same sort of thing again, given he's trained by Robin Dickon, but he's extremely well tipped up and ended up going off favourite. But he's run a cracking race to be second. And Irish Cavalier happened to be the one who for a long time did operate under the radar, even though he was reasonably well backed on the day to go off at 11-1. That's form that should work out really well. All the right horses came to the fore in that. I still think there might be more to come from the likes of Knockhouse and Little Johnny, finished 5th and 6th. I don't think there would have been ideal conditions for either of that pair. But again, it's not so much that Irish Cavalier is a horse you need to follow blind. I thought he was just well handicapped coming into this. His form had a very, very solid look to it. But if you watch the replay again, I thought Paul Townend did a really good job to have him covered up towards the inside, but was able to bring him wide into the straight without losing ground. I thought that was a very, very good piece of race riding. And again, if you watch Paul through the week, he did it very well, and Glenn's Melody took his opportunity where it came there. And his ride to win the county hurdle was sublime. So, he's a massively underrated rider because he's always playing second fiddle to Ruby Walsh, but he's happy to do that, and he gets to ride top-class horses on a regular basis. If you don't mind me heading back to the earlier handicap on the card, the Ultimate Business Solutions handicap chase, you might well have the Irish Grand National and English Grand National winners in that, if that's the kind of thing you like.
Go on then. Druid's nephew for the English.
Druid's nephew is an absolute standout for the Grand National. The interesting thing about him post-race is, by Barry Garrity was interviewed about him. I said, would he have a chance in the Grand National? And he said he didn't think he was a flamboyant enough jumper for Aintree. Well, in my opinion, you don't want a flamboyant jumper at Aintree. You do want a safe jumper, and I thought his jumping was very good. Again, it wasn't knock your eyes out, but that's what jumping and handicap chases should be about. It should be about no dramas, not losing ground at your fences, and just being professional. And I thought he was very professional. He's beaten a very talented horse in Grand Gesture. Grand Gesture is a complete screw, but he's very talented. He's refused to race before Grand Gesture, but clearly when his head is right, he's very good, and he was on his best. Well, he was eventually on his best behaviour. He didn't want to go to the start. He didn't really want to set off in the race, but once he did, he was very good. Because he's a little bit funny like that, I don't think they'll want to wait 2 years before giving him his chance in a big staying handicap. I think they realise that he may train off completely at some stage. So gets into the Irish National in a decent weight. And it's just a case of whether he plays ball at the start, because if he jumps off in that, he's got all the attributes needed to go very close indeed. And he's probably still a decent price. And the Druids Neck is available around 14-1 for the National on Betfair. I think he looks ridiculously well handicapped in this form, put it that way. And if he takes to it, he showed early in the season he says 3.5 miles well. And it's just a case of whether he takes to the national fences. But that's less of an issue now than it used to be. And he should be favourite for that race. So that's two worth bearing in mind for the next month or so.
Paul, one of your contributors in your Jumpers to Follow book is the Jamie Cudd. Obviously, he had the JP McManus winner on his birthday with Course of Courses, ex-Lad book winner. What did you make of his performance, and particularly Jamie's ride in that race, and also any of the other performances on the card on Tuesday?
Yeah, I don't think it's any secret that he's right up there among the best of his peers. Jamie Codd, I think he rode his 700th winner he rode over the weekend in point to points. But what did he have? He only had two. Did he only have the two rides the weekend last week? And he had two winners, obviously with the pipe horse, the package later in the week. He crept into the race, and I think he could have been called a winner a long way from home in the 4 miler, which is a fair play to Catherine Fry on the preview that you and Rory were involved in with Teletextile, and she was pretty keen on that. To be honest, on the Tuesday, I've got more of a list from the Wednesday, but again, I'd echo what was said about the Druid's nephew in terms of handicap point of view for the national. And I thought Pendra, I know he's a bit of a cliff horse of mine. I backed him at 25-1 before last week's race. I do still think he's on a mark from which he can win a race, but now it is starting to get to the stage where he doesn't look quick enough for 2.5, but does he really stay 3 or 3-1 round Cheltenham? And I didn't think he jumped particularly well enough, to be honest, on Tuesday. He didn't make any serious errors, but he certainly wasn't making up any ground at any of his fences. But I'm sure I'll persist with him wherever he lines up next.
And James, for you on the Tuesday, was it Annie Power? Guessing she's come out of the race. Well, we've not really heard anything to the contrary. Would you be looking at the entry hurdle with her, and possibly taking the crown from the new one?
Well, yeah, if she's absolutely fine, I definitely would. I think the new one has always been slightly worse at Aintree than he had been at Cheltenham, and I think he seems to have been on a downward curve this season, and I think he's very beatable when it comes to that meeting. And if she's right, I think she probably would beat him. But you can understand if they were a bit cautious with her having had that fall, and they might just wait for Punchestown. But I think she's definitely good enough for that sort of race, and she deserves a big win. It's such a shame she came down, because I think it would have been a real annihilation. Something that didn't quite happen on the day, because Nasir was impressive and Fahim was impressive, but they weren't destroying the field in the end, because I think Ruby was just getting the job done. Whereas in that mare's race, she was about to absolutely destroy them. But talking of the eye catchers, Dave mentioned a bit of a puzzle, and yeah, she ran brilliantly, I thought, because essentially I think she's all about stamina. She probably needs 3 miles soft ground. She had this sort of latent talent to be there, staying up the hill, and nearly nick it actually. But I think she's a very tall mare, and I think she's probably going to go chasing next season. I think that's what Noel Fee said yesterday or the day before yesterday. So I think she'll do very well in staying novice chasers next season if that's the way she goes.
I was a bit sorry. I was going to say I was a bit disappointed they didn't save her for the Albert Bartlett on Friday, because it would have suited her out to the ground, the softer ground and the 3 mile trip.
Yeah, a proper slog would definitely have suited, wouldn't it?
Yeah, I'd back her at 20s for that. So I may be slightly biased, but such is life.
Such is life indeed. And we'll move on to Tuesday, Dave. Headline act on the Tuesday was the Champion Chase. Everyone had questions about Saïd Agrouji backing up his win in the Chepstow. I think it was 18 days before coming into this race. We had Sprinter Sacre and his Dickie Hart, and I think operations on his wind, which range from 3 to 9, depending on who you listen to on Twitter. What did you make of the Champion Chase on the Wednesday, and was it purely a case of Nicholls' exploits rightly getting his training exploits getting the recognition that it deserves in Dodging Bullets winning the big one?
Yeah, I think, as much as the post-race analysis was all around Saïd Agrouji and Sprinter Sacre, I think it's unfair not to point out that, in a way, the right horse has won the race. Grade 1 winners win Grade 1 races, and Dodging Bullets has shown this season that he is, a Grade 1 winner, regardless of how strong you think the division is this year. He is a dual Grade 1 winner and a triple Grade 1 winner. So, the right result, if you like that sort of thing. The race itself is so difficult, isn't it? I mean, it's difficult to assess in so much as you've got Somersby and Special Chara, who are probably, Somersby certainly past his best. Although I do know one good judge putting him up each way in the week until he hit the board, having sort of been in all the big races this season. But you know exactly where you are now with Somersby and what he's capable of doing. So you can't say that Dodging Bullets has run right up to the best level of his form in winning this. And certainly, the fact that Special Tiara is probably a Grade 2 horse back in third isn't so far away. It backs up that impression. Obviously, next season we're going to have Underso stepping into this, and you have to say that I think if Underso had taken his chance in this, he would probably have won it. You have to say he would probably have won it. So, yes, you can argue that the division is weak this year. It probably is. The result is the right one. The horses in behind, well, I've been a big fan of Saïd Agrouji, and I still maintain, if you like that Chepstow form that was getting crabbed at the time, still a perfectly solid piece of form. They say that the ground was a little bit too quick for him. It's on the quick side, and it certainly looked more like the Saïd Agrouji at Newbury that just didn't look very comfortable at fences, and rather than the one that we saw in the race last year that was so fluent all the way around, really, and you could call him the winner last year from sort of halfway. Here he was constantly on off the bridle and never really looked like he was travelling at all. This isn't his form. He's capable of better, but again, next year is going to be 10. Probably seen the best of Saïd Agrouji. Mr. Mole was disappointing. He's probably not up to this sort of class. I was hopeful more than anything that he might be, but there was no throughout the race did you think he was ever going to get involved. And then we come to Sprinter Sacre, who, there's still, as far as we're aware, no decision on his future. So there's no rush to make any sort of decisions. But it would be a big surprise, I think, to me and probably a lot of other people if we see him on a racecourse again. My argument after Ascot was that regardless of how much ability you think remains in a horse, if the fight isn't there, then all that becomes irrelevant. And I didn't think there was any fight at Ascot, and that was very much the case. I thought here that visually that was what was backed up. He floundered. He absolutely floundered when Barry Geraghty asked him for an effort. It was almost as if he'd forgotten how to race and forgot what to do. Completely floundered and was beaten in 4 strides, and it was a shame to see. It is a shame to see. I would be personally very surprised if we see him on a racecourse again.
Well, are we going to see Sprinter Sack pointing in the next 18 months?
Well, Kyber Kim style, you mean?
Yep, I'm saving up for Kyber Kim Sprinter Sack double, and we'll all hear it on Camilla Henderson going on about Twitter.
Yes, it'd be interesting. I didn't hear anything at all regarding excuses for him on the day. Was there anything other than a shrug of the shoulders from Nicky?
Yeah, it was pretty much that. I think that post race there was a few toys thrown out the pram by Gary Moore about the ground.
Gary Moore, and I like Gary Moore a lot, but he was a dreadful loser, wasn't he? He complained the ground was dead, and he complained the ground was fast, and said it was a disgrace that Cheltenham were providing that kind of ground for the festival. And I thought it was just dreadfully poor sportsmanship on his part.
On the part of Sprinter Sack, nothing did come to light. I think.
No, I suspect that, again, getting back to the whole how many wind-offs have you had argument, that chances are that he's completely wind. Steady.
Dave's gone.
Again, I've always said the heart was never an issue. The heart was one of those things that took headlines, but was never really a serious issue. And again, the story this season was about whether he would get his enthusiasm back at home and his appetite for training, which he didn't have for a long time after Punchestown 2 seasons ago. And the vibes were that he was working better, and that he'd schooled brilliantly. But also, I'd heard that he'd schooled badly on his own. And then when he was allowed to follow something else up the gallows, he jumped much better. But it just sounds like it's been very hit and miss with him. But it'd be no surprise if the issue turned out to be that he's reached the end of the road in terms of how effective a wind operation can be with him. There's only so many you can have. I've heard 8 and 9. And I'd heard 3 years ago that he'd had 3 or 4. So that makes perfect sense. And it may simply be that the engine is there, but the I don't know. I don't know enough about cars to come up with a clever line there, really. It may just be that the carburetor's gone, for example. But that's enough to stop him, really, because there are no spare parts anymore. So I would be absolutely stunned if we see him again after that. The one thing that Nicky Henderson said beforehand was he's not going to be any better in 6 months or a year. Where we've got him now is the best we can possibly get him. And how he performs will be a reflection of that. So he was as well as they could get him. He was as fit as they could get him. He was, he was as enthusiastic as they could get him, and yet there was nothing there. So that has to be the end for him. Sadly, but it's pretty much inevitable. I thought Summersby obviously ties the form down to a degree, but to be honest, if you look at how he ran behind dodging bullets at Ascot, Tony McCoy. Absolutely.
I thought he put a gun to his head in that race.
Yeah, really did. Whereas Brian Hughes gave him a lovely ride here. Summersby isn't the kind of horse you want to put it. I can see why you'd want to ride him that way, because he's so bloody frustrating. But he responds better to kindness. And the bottom line was he just ran better here for just being coaxed into it. He actually should have won the race. He came there to win at the last, and he actually wouldn't go past, would he? And that's always been the issue with Summersby. There's been tons of ability there, and everyone thought he was always finishing well over 2 miles and then not getting over 2 mile 5, and people thought the Henrietta Knight was getting the trip wrong with him. And fundamentally, what was wrong with him was just his head. It doesn't really have a winning mentality. And again, he could easily have turned the clock back. It would have been an amazing result if he'd won here, but he didn't want to know. And dodging bullets, in fairness to Paul Nicholls, you've got to give him an awful lot of credit. He's got this horse on the straight and narrow, and and he's only 7, so he could easily do better. But he's been on the go for a long time. He was trained fairly hard on the flat with Andy Oliver, and he was on the go as a juvenile hurdler as well. So whether he improves beyond the age of 7 is up for debate, but that doesn't really matter. And Paul Nicholls has managed to get a champion chase out of him, and he deserves a huge amount of credit for that, because this is not an easy horse at all.
James, do you want to add your thoughts about the champion chase? And I think, do you want to move on to the RSA?
Yeah, well, I think Dodging Bullets is as people have always all said, is a great example of Paul Nicholls' training skills, and particularly I think his intense schooling, because his jumping is so quick and good now. I think it makes up for any deficiencies he may have in overall ability, compared to the really top champion chasers. But it's so quick that he can win a race like that, and he can win the good race when they're lacking in the stars, which that division is at the moment. Sada Gruja, I think, was just a bit flat because of running at Chepstow and that in the soft ground not long before, and I think it was obviously a very difficult decision for Gary Moore to make, whether to run in there or not, because to go in after running so poorly at Newbury would be difficult with so much sort of lacking in confidence. If you didn't want to arrive on back of a fall. Champagne Fever was given a run by Willie Mullins quite near to the festival for the same sort of reason. Obviously he didn't turn up, which was a shame because he could have been very much involved there. But Sada Gruja had to have that run, and he was good there, and they went into the champion chase with confidence, but it was just too much, and they're a bit unlucky really, because I think if he'd been in the same form as last year, I think he probably would have beaten Dodging Bullets. But it was just I think it was all about Paul Nicholls getting a horse right and proving that he's not just a winter horse. He can hold his form into the spring, and he proved a lot of people wrong there. And obviously Summersby, it was amazing to see him come there at the last and thinking he could win. But yeah, he just wasn't desperate to go past. But it was another impressive run at the festival. Got 7 in a row now. He's constantly getting placed, and he's just a sort of enigmatic but admirable horse to follow. Onto the RSA, the best horse there won convincingly. There was a risk that King's Palace without Coney could get his own way in front, but that was taken out immediately by Barry Geraghty going off on the young master. I mean, they said afterwards, or they said yesterday, I think Neil Mulholland said he was too keen, so that's why they went to the front. But he was in front from the start immediately, so it wasn't like he pulled himself there. And he burnt himself out really and left King's Palace to sort of do the rest of the donkey work. And while Don Polly was the best horse in the race and would have been difficult to beat in any scenario, you'd have hoped that they might have been clear. Maybe it's the second last and he'd fly up the hill, but essentially King's Palace and Southfield Theatre both made horrendous mistakes at the fourth last and handed the race to him, because as everyone knows, he's very lazy and just needs to be sort of woken up every so often and keep him going and keep him involved. And then with those 2 mistakes from the eventual second and King's Palace, he suddenly found himself in front, and given how well he stays, the race was basically over then, because he came around the bend, quickened away, and then I think idled and let them back into it, and then just stayed on up the hill with his ears pricked, going all over the place, loads left. And I thought what was really interesting was how at the end, when he was, I think when the jockey Brian Cooper was being interviewed, there was no sweat on Don Polly at all, but on the walk back in, he seemed to have much more effort walking back in amongst the crowds, which he didn't like at all. And once he eventually got into the winners' enclosure, he was awash with sweat, because he certainly wasn't after the race, and he's got loads left, and he's definitely a proper Gold Cup horse that's stayed all day, and he has got a bit of pace, as he showed when he came in the Martin 5 over 2.5. I think the race as a whole probably wasn't as strong as it looked beforehand. There was quite an interesting one from Adriana de Mott. I thought Ruby was very, very careful on her, probably wary of her stamina, and he got her into it looking like she was about to get a place, but just ran out by Windy Warrior, who's a thorough stayer. But she's probably got more races in her, and if that new race next season is a mare's chase, which people have been talking about, then could be one for that. And Southfield Theatre, yeah, he ran an excellent race. I hadn't been totally taken with his jumping this season, but it was there apart from that one bad mistake in this race, and he clearly stays well, handles that quick ground, and enjoys Cheltenham. He got a nasty injury, apparently, nasty cut on his back leg, which means he won't see him this season, but next year you'd imagine he'll be that sort of typical Nicholls RSA onto the Hennessy type of horse. Behind that, King's Palace disappointing, a bit like the Outpart last year, taking on for the lead. He just didn't seem to really enjoy it, and having looked so quick over his fences, his jumping just wasn't the same, which was disappointing, I guess.
Dave, you talked there about dodging bullets, about being able to come back this year, and whereas previously he didn't have a similar profile going into the spring. Obviously, dodging bullets dispelled those ideas to a point this year. Do you think King's Palace is in that bracket where he just doesn't like the festivals, or the occasion might get to him and he just doesn't deliver on the big day?
Yeah, it's he's had 2 goes now, and twice as disappointed after a good season. So it does raise a question mark. I think it's a little bit difficult to tell at this stage. I mean, this was a race where both King's Palace and the Young Master, the 2 horses that have set the pace, have not just been beaten, but they're absolutely crashed out of sight in the end. So in that respect, they've both run well below where you would have expected them to. And as James has alluded to with the Young Master, it was a strange decision. We were all sort of scratching our heads at the moment. Very Garrity went to the front. Just not what we were expecting at all. So he saw that saying he was a bit free, and we're like, particularly free. Don Polly was the right winner, and he's the RSA is a staying test, and the horse that had the bottom of stamina was the one that won it. In behind, I thought If in Doubt ran an interesting race. The jumping still not all that yet. It needs still needs to be tied up a bit. He still doesn't see a stride at a fence. But still a mark of, I don't think his mark's been touched. 149 would make him look sort of quite interesting in staying handicaps. Wonder if they'll be tempted by the bet 365. I think it'd be quite interesting if he turned up for that. That will be.
He's 151 now, by the way.
He's what? Sorry, Rory.
He's rated 151 now.
On If in Doubt, obviously Sandown might not be ideal with the pond fences and whatnot, and the downhill fence down the back, but would you, off 151, and I think there's every chance that Coney Green might still go for the Hennessy, would you have a look at the Hennessy getting 20, I think, was it £21 off him?
I think he'd almost certainly go the Irish National, by the way, just to butt in there.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah, I could see that.
The Irish National, he's owned by JP McManus.
Yeah.
That's where he's going, surely.
Yeah, I could see that. Wherever he goes, he's going to need to jump with more fluency than he has done. But this is only his 5th start, when all said and done. He is going to improve. You would hope he's jumping well, improving. I thought he was the sort of eye catcher in behind, if you like.
Paul, on Don Polly, Gigginstown vindicated to go for a Grade 1 and sidestep a National Hunt chase?
Yeah, I think so. I think they should have run Wounded Warrior in the 4 mile myself, to be honest. Whether that was a battle with Willie in terms of Don Polly and him wanting Patrick to ride, maybe. But he's won the RSA, so don't think anyone can argue with the owners there. Again, as it's been said, the right horse has won. Looks a potential future Gold Cup horse. Stay all day. They've got nowhere near to the bottom of this horse yet, I think, the way it is. He was dossing up the hill. Probably found himself in front sooner than ideal, but as James said, stamina kicked in, and I think he'll be a serious player in all the leading races, the Lexus, the Irish Hennessy and the likes next year, which will then probably lead on to possibly the likes of Vitor, and we'll touch on him next week, but the likes of him going possibly down a different route, maybe the King George, because I'm sure they won't want them two clashing as soon as possible. But I say the one in behind, I thought the run from Wounded Warrior was good, and once he steps up to marathon trips, I think he's one to note.
On Don Polly and the placing next year, I think it's been talked about going into the festival that Rich Ritchie and William Mullins had the idea of focusing purely on the festival and then play out from then on with the likes of Punchestown, Fairyhouse and Aintree. With the likes of Vitor and the other talented horses which he has, do you think Gigginstown are more likely to look at all the plunder the big prizes in Ireland with all the Grade 1s, and they've got, as you said there, they've got able standing with Don Pauly, and Rich Ritchie will probably look at more away from the Irish soft round races.
Yeah, I think taking each horse individually is the way they need to go, not as grouping them together. Certainly Don Polly, we know he handles the quicker ground at the Spring, having won at the last two festivals. Ramwell punches down, but he handles deep ground, so that's not an issue. And he is all about stamina, so I think he should be aimed at the races such as, say, the Lexus, Irish Hennessy and the likes. But for Tour, he's got more pace, and I think even though you're saying going up to 3 miles, I think somewhere like Kempton, he'd probably start off, who would have thought, John Dirk in that kind of 2.5 mile, and then take it from there. But I think he's got the pace to go any trip really for Tour, but I'd say we'll touch on him next week, I'm sure.
Rory, and what were your thoughts on the RSA chase? More along similar lines to the question which I give to Dave, is King's Palace a write-off after January? Because he didn't look the same in things at Newbury when he was winning a match race.
He's been badly campaigned for me. He's a very talented horse, but he's gone to Cheltenham for the festival 2 years in a row with a very similar preparation, beating decent fields but smallish fields at Cheltenham, and then having racing at the same track but under very different conditions in March. And on both occasions, again, Tom Scudamore could have been a lot more restrained on him. He's got involved in a bit of a war with the young master. That was a strange tactic from Barry Geraghty on the young master to try to take King's Palace on. I didn't think anyone would be that worried about King's Palace that they tried to get him out of his stride, given that Don Pauly was clearly the horse to beat. And again, once the young master weakened, I thought Tom Scudamore should have been able then to restrain King's Palace a little bit in front and just work on his jumping. For me, his jumping is either his big strength or his downfall. He can be exceptionally slick, very quick from one side of a fence to the other, and I thought he could use that to his advantage. But while he's been ridden for dear life between fences, he can't utilise that jumping. And again, he's inclined to, if he's wrong in a fence, he's inclined to dive at it a little bit. He did that a couple of times in the RSA, and he's not one you'd have in your mind for a Grade 1 success. But he's still the type who will no doubt win a half-decent race next winter. But in terms of future development, you'd have 2 or 3 in front of him, certainly, from this field. The most pleasing thing about this race was just watching Don Pauly from the last. The way he cocked his ears, flicked them back and forward, looked all about him, showed just how much he had in hand. This wasn't the best performance by a novice chaser all week by a fair way, given what he had to beat. But you do get the impression with Don Pauly there's potentially an awful lot that's uncovered, or sorry, that is covered up by his style of racing, because he doesn't do any more than he's asked. He can switch off and let the bridle drop, but when he's asked to pick up, he does it very well, and he's very, very strong from the last fence. He was quick up the running as well here, despite it being quite a strong pace, and there's no telling exactly how good he is. I know. Again, we won't really touch on this in full, but Vautour clearly put him in the shade with his performance the following day. But Don Pauly was tremendously professional, and it was a very, very likable performance. And you were immediately thinking next year's Gold Cup is just the next 2 days with a Stable Companion winning the JLT and then the Gold Cup itself. You're then your mind is crowded with other horses who will play a leading role in the big one next March. But Don Pauly looked the ideal horse going forward for a Cheltenham Gold Cup, dual Cheltenham Festival winner, a horse who's so switched off that you're not going to get to the bottom of him for a while. Tremendous attitude, great build. There's very little you don't like about him. For all, it's easy to knock the bare form of this win. He was a lot better than the bare form.
Rory, we'll stay with you for the other obstacle. Grade 1 on the race on Wednesday was the Neptune Novices. Been won previous years, the likes of Hardy Eustace, the new one, and obviously last year Forheen. I get the impression that this year is not as strong, and obviously talk of Windsor Park going back over the Gold Cup trip, possibly going down the route which Dermot travels so well. Is there anything in behind him which could trouble the champion hurdle field next year? And also, what your thoughts on the ride on Davy Russell? It changed the tactics completely in the Neptune making all, whereas previously they were holding them up.
Yeah, he did make all the running. In fact, I think he's been put down as making all the running here, but he jumped out in front. He was then happy for others to go on ahead of him, but he was never more than 2 or 3 lengths off the pace. And Davy Russell was very forward about it when interviewed afterwards, saying that he'd ridden this horse with a view to educating him, and he knew he'd been criticised for it, including probably by connections, actually. But Davy very much knows his own mind, and he knew that Windsor Park needed teaching, and you've only got to watch his 2 runs to see how appallingly he jumped in the early stages. Although you could argue, in retrospect, he jumped poorly because he resented being restrained. But whatever Davy did with him in those runs, it was hugely beneficial, because he was a different horse here. I didn't like him going into it because, he'd made very serious mistakes on both runs over hurdles to date. I thought the form of the race in which he finished behind Outlander in his previous start was potentially dubious coming into the festival, although it looks very good now with 2 festival winners behind Outlander there, Windsor Park, and then Marcello Tar as well. And No More Heroes was also there. He ran a cracker in the Albert Bartlett, so that was good form. This is a big step up from Windsor Park, and he's the only horse you could possibly take from the race for future grade or Group 1 success. And to be honest, he does look like he might be the type that could win a group race on the flat. Same Connections had Rite of Passage beaten in this race 4 or 5 years ago before winning the Ascot Gold Cup. And Dermot Weld has had plenty of horses beaten at the Cheltenham Festival before becoming superstars in the flat. Vintage Crop was beaten in a champion hurdle and well enough beaten, and Fortune and Fame beaten here as well before going on to better things in the flat. So it wouldn't be a surprise to see Windsor Park do something special. He's been lightly raced in the flat and he looked very good last summer. So that's probably his future. I thought it was an absolutely dreadful Neptune behind him. Parter Games has done well this season, but he's not going to progress. Nichols Canyon has done well this season, but he's not going to progress. The only horse you'd be positive about behind the winner was the horse who was clear second best in the day, and that was Vita de Rock, who would have been a close second, but for completely misjudging the last and almost coming down. Barry Garrity set up on him afterwards. I mean, it was a really, really bad mistake. It was a similar mistake to the one that had Annie Parr on the deck. Barry didn't ride him out after the last, and yet he was still closing strongly into 4th of the line. He'd have been beaten a length by Windsor Park had he not made that mistake. And he's very, very likeable. But whether he's a proper Grade 1 horse out of novice company is open to debate. Aside from that, I wouldn't touch any of these with a barge pole.
Anyone got any other thoughts on Neptune? Because I think that covers it for me.
I do.
Oh.
Well, I thought it was odd that they rode Nicholas Canyon like they did, given how good he was from the front last time, and they basically handed the initiative to others, including Windsor Park, who'd been dropped out the back, and Nicholas Canyon didn't really settle, so couldn't show his form. Not that I rated him particularly highly, but I thought it was strange. And Parlour Games as well was dropped way out the back at the start. I know that they think if they were sort of maybe riding him for a turn of foot, but gave away about sort of 12 or 13 lengths, I think, to Windsor Park at the beginning, which is very necessary. But I would be more positive about Vita de Rock as well, because we've not seen him over 3 miles yet, and I think that's definitely what he needs. And the only reason he ran here was because I think it was going to be so competitive on the Friday, and he'd proven himself as a high-class horse at 2.5 in this division anyway. And I think he's going to go to Aintree now in the 3 mile event, and given how strongly he finishes, I think it'll be very difficult to beat there. And it wouldn't surprise me if he turned into a world hurdle contender, because I think he would have been a very close second, as Roy said. I think he's very unexposed, obviously, at 3 miles, and I think that's where you'll see him at his best, especially at Aintree.
Paul, will come to you for the 4th and final grade 1 on the day, on the Wednesday, and that was the Weatherby's Champion bumper. I think that this was a standing start after we talked about in a previous wrap about how it would affect it in the Cheltenham Festival. Moonracer, I think he can be marked up considerably for the way that he started the race. I don't think Tom Scudamore was probably ideally placed from the off, but he's won this fairly well, and Modus has came back, and credit to Robert Stevens after such a long break, he's done it well.
Yeah, definitely. I certainly think the winner, well, and the second, were inconvened by the start, as you say. Moonracer, I think Tom Scudamore would have been a bit more handy throughout, but as he said in the interview afterwards, sometimes when you're on a good horse, they just take you into positions and get you out of a hole, really. And I think he was giving all credit to the horse. I think the way he quickened up the hill was impressive. And as you say, I think it was probably on the day, maybe possibly value for a little bit more. I did think before the race, I thought I liked a lot of these going into it. I thought there was plenty of depth to this year's champion bumper. I know Modus finished further back last year, but if you use Vigil as a marker, he was beaten a little bit further this year than he was last year. I know he was well fancied going into it, but a lot of the ones I liked were more long-term prospects, and I think the Pipes have had this race in mind for some time, and Moonracer was probably trained more for the day. I'm not saying by any means he won't go on at all, because he should make up into a top novice hurdler next year, and you would assume stepping up in trip, but he didn't look to avoid the pace the way he quickened, so I would expect him to start at the minimum trip. Just rattle through a few that we've mentioned on previous wraps. Wait For Me and Theo's Charm came from the same Ascot race. Wait For Me at the end, the Ascot race was ridden. Well, he was in the right position basically in that race, but he was given a ground saving ride this time, right up the inner throughout. I thought he ran well. Theo's Charm again for 100 to 1 shot. I had a couple of quid on him at 250, 260, I think it was. And before the off, he ran well. I think he finished 7th in the end. Again, he's a nice long-term prospect. Yamworth and Super Sunday came from another Ascot race that I know James liked well. Again, both of them shaped with considerable promise. Yamworth was wide compared to a few of the others, so again, stayed on really well. I wouldn't be surprised to see Wait For Me and Yamworth maybe go on to Aintree. Super Sunday showed up well for a long way. And the other one I liked the run of was Montana Bell. She'd shaped well in a mare's bumper behind a bit of a puzzle. The listed race, I think it was, at the October meeting. And we've touched on it a couple of times today. And she hadn't been seen since. Again, a big price, 50 to 1, but she travelled well up the back. Yeah, she might have picked off some of the beaten horses, but the way she moved through the field, and if she went on to Aintree to run the mare's bumper, it'd probably give us a good indication of the depth of this year's bumper, because I'd expect her to go pretty well in that. And one more I thought ran well for a long way before dropping out was Jetstream Jack. So I don't know if anything's come to light about his performance, but he seemed to go well and was well touted beforehand. He beat a previous winner that JP McManus snapped up at Fairy House, and I think he's a rare Diana Waitley owned horse in Ireland. But again, he showed promise beforehand and was well talked about. I think with the way he dropped out, I would have thought something was amiss, so I'll be looking to see if anything come to light. And just touching that, going back to the Neptune, I didn't spec on. I thought Beast of Burden ran well for a long time, but then dropped out like an absolute stone. I thought it was more than he was outpaced, and that came to light afterwards that I think he burst a blood vessel. So again, he's probably one to maybe give another chance to next year.
And James, obviously you keep an eye on your bumper form. I mean, in particular the Ascot form. What did you make of Yanworth and Super Sundays one here in the bumper?
Well, Yanworth ran particularly well as I expected. I always thought that was a very strong race, as I've said before. I mean, talking of the start, I think the first three were all in the same sort of back inside quarter during the race, and I think being slightly slow and in behind cover there at the beginning might prove beneficial, because Super Sunday was right on the outside of the start, also stood still for a second. But I think Jonathan Burt really rousted him up and essentially lit him up then, and he tanked his way to the front and basically did too much. And he still travelled really well into the straight, just basically didn't have enough left and faded into just behind Vigilant about 6th. But the way Yanworth was so close up at the end, and the way Super Sunday had beaten him comfortably at Ascot. I think you've got to think Super Sunday is a lot better than he showed there, and he would still be the one I take away, and he was the one I took into it. So maybe I'm a little bit biased, but I think the start was key because he just got lit up straight away. Aside from that, it was disappointing to see the Mullins horses all well beaten. But having seen them in the paddock, most of them were great big staying chase type horses. So I suppose it wasn't a huge surprise if you'd seen them beforehand. But Bordini wasn't that type. I think he had some sort of problem because he was pulled up. He was the only one to be pulled up. That was disappointing when you expect the battalions to come over, and it's about the only race he didn't. He sort of failed to show up, really, wasn't it? Basically, every other horse Mullins brought over ran its race, if not did a career best.
Dave and Rory, any standouts in the paddock for, as James said there about Mullins Chargers being potential chasers rather than a bumper type? Start with you, Dave.
Sorry, Dan, what did you say?
Was there anything which stood out in the paddock away from the obviously the first four home?
Yes, Super Sunday, who was one of the first ones actually into the paddock. As has been pointed out, he got quite lit up in the race, and was lit up in the paddock as well. Actually, took quite a hold, 2 handlers, and the more I mean, given a horse, given how wound up he became, it was quite a surprise that he was in the paddock for as long as he was. He was the sort of horse you really just want to sort of get him, walk around once and out again. But he was, in terms of what I want to take out of the paddock, he was the one that I thought got the most eye-catching. I know Paul's mentioned Montana Bell as well. I thought she looked well. She got plenty of plus points from me as they were walking around. They were the two that I would want to take for the future. I think we're absolutely right with what we're saying. I think you've got to be a little bit careful, particularly with the first two, Moon Racer and Modus, with regards to the future. I'm not entirely sure that there will be particularly long-term prospects. It was lovely to see Modus finish second. I'd had a few quid on each way at lunchtime. I got a feeling that Fresh might be the time to catch Modus. And it was interesting that winner and second had sort of come together. Modus has tracked Moon Racer all the way around. They've had virtually the same run into the straight. Modus has just been sort of 2 lengths away, and I think perhaps had Modus been a little bit nearer to Moon Racer, it might have been quite interesting to finish. But in terms of for the future, definitely Super Sunday would be the one I want to take out of it.
And Rory, any thoughts on the bumper before you want to talk of any performances in the rest of the Wednesday's card?
Yeah, just touching the bumper again. Paul's mentioned him already, but Theo's Charm is one I'm looking forward to when he jumps a hurdle. Very much bred for that out of a decent mare called Kate's Charm, who was created class herself. He's going to run 2.5 miles. He'd caught my eye, as he did Paul, when running on into third at Ascot, and that race won by Wait For Me. And again, I thought he kept on well, despite lacking a turn of foot in this race. And seventh wouldn't have got too many eyes. And given that he was 200 to 1 plus on Betfair for the race, it seems that most haven't caught on to him as one with a big future. But given a lot of these are trained specifically for the bumper rather than for a future career, I think it's always worth looking at the also-rans. And Theo's Charm would be... He's not top of my list in terms of who's going to be the very best of these, but he's definitely going to be underrated next season. And he'd be one that I'd consider for a sneaky 10 to follow next season. I think he'll pay his way. Dave mentioned Super Sunday. I didn't see any of these in the paddock. Obviously, I wasn't anywhere near Cheltenham last week. I was covering the meeting from Dublin, so I'm not going to pretend anything caught my eye. But I liked Super Sunday a lot when I saw him before, and I thought he was maybe just a little bit too free here in his first start for Henry de Bromhead, and he's the type who's got the size and the scope to do better again next season. And he's in good hands for a hurdling / chasing career with Henry de Bromhead, and once he settles down in that yard, I think he again will do well. So that would be that'd be it from me. The only other thing I'd say there is obviously Moon Racer got Tom Scudamore out of jail in a big way, and you can see from his reaction after pulling up, it was relief rather than elation at landing a touch. And there was a lot of money on Moonracer here. And given that I wouldn't say the owners are gamblers, I thought he was laid out by the yard for this. And I've noticed 2 or 3 times last week that if there was a false start or if they had to line up twice, Tom Scudamore is absolutely dreadful about getting a horse away on terms. He wanted to get Moonracer off close to the lead here, and I think he wanted to do the same on the pipe gelding in the yes. As several times this week, he wanted to be in a certain position, but whenever he's starting from a standing start, there's something about Tom's body language that horses don't immediately jump for him. Whereas if you look at Ruby Walsh, he will sit there with almost a loose rein, but when he wants to go, whatever he's riding will automatically go forward for him. Horses don't seem to automatically go forward at all for Tom. He needs to get after them. And if you get a chance to watch the replays again of several races where Tom rode, when he sits down and says go, he has to do it 2 or 3 times on a couple of these horses before they take off, and that can be really crucial at Cheltenham, especially in the handicaps. It's very difficult to make up ground that you've lost in the start.
And away from the Grade 1s on the day, I think there's a couple of talk on Twitter about Petit Swan eligibility for the Coral Cup. Obviously, wasn't classed as a novice, but only had 2 or 3 ones in France.
He runs in France, but one of them was in a bumper. He won both his hurdle starts, sandwiched by a bumper. In fairness to me, I spoke to 2 representatives of the BHA's handicapping team about this and said, what's different about a horse who had 2 runs as a novice but then was put away to run in a race like this when he was no longer strictly a novice, but had exactly the same profile? And the answer is, and I thought it was a fair enough answer to be honest, is that where a novice, you could say, well, you need to have another run in novice company. If a horse is no longer strictly a novice and he's raced at 130 plus in the first place, there are very few races those horses can run in without running in top class company. And so there's pressure on the handicapping team to basically say, right, well, because your options are limited, we will let you run in one of these listed or Grade 3 handicaps where you wouldn't be allowed to if you're a novice. The difference simply is the availability of races for those horses. So while it's not ideal, not many trainers would deliberately lay a horse out like this for a handicap like that. Leave a horse off for 6 months or more just to take advantage of what's a potentially lenient handicap markets. It takes a lot of patience to do it. I don't think that was probably the issue with Paul Nicholls and Petit Swan. Certainly listening to him, Paul suggested that he galloped the horse 2 or 3 times and thought he might be very good, but didn't really know where he stood. A little bit of digging suggests that he was very well backed by representatives of the owner or trainer going into this, so they may have known a little bit more than we did.
Yeah, I think there was talk of Nick Schofield taking him for a race course gallop, or might have been a gallop at the yard, and you just said that this is a different beast, or possibly the best one he's ever been on. And I think he was he entered in the National Spirit, saw that he got a mark of 139, and thought, right, we'll keep that.
Yeah, it's possible they did that just to see where they stood. It's a brave move for a horse with only 2 runs over hurdles to run in a race as bruising as the Coral Cup. It's not easy to do. You need to be thrown in because your lack of experience is liable to cost you a lot. But again, in fairness to the trainer, you wouldn't have thought by looking at him and his demeanour through the race that he had as little experience as he had. I thought he looked very professional. Apart from nearly falling at the second, he was very good beyond that. This was a very strong race. I thought you could be extremely positive about the first 5 home, and I think it's form that will work out very well.
James, we'll come to you for the third one home in the Coral Cup. Was the Activial and similar, well, the same owners had Bouville and Fred Winter. Hopefully you back Bouville each way, because it's been a decent shout from yourself in the lead up to the Cheltenham Festival. What did you make of the Fred Winter race?
Well, I think as I thought beforehand, it was a lot about stamina, because they went quite hard, and the winner ended up being a horse that had already won over 2 miles, 3 and a bit furlongs at Exeter. But yeah, watching Bouverie the whole way through, who I'd been keen on for a while. He seemed to have a dream run, really. He jumped well, and Golden Doyen, when he fell, took out most of the horse on the inside, so it gave him a lovely path through. And he jumped the second last perfectly, and I thought, here we go. And then this horse, the outsider of Nichols 3, then who already had the form of a further, just got first run on him slightly and outstayed him up the hill, and it was a bit galling to see. And it's a shame when I asked Paul Nichols at that preview meeting we talked about last time when I asked about Bouverie, I didn't say, well, actually, I'm about to run the winner next week, which he did. But Bouverie ran really well, and I think it was a decent race. I think Starkitect did exceptionally well to make the running go quite hard and still hold on for fourth. But it's a hard race to watch back and not just wish he's there a little bit earlier. But he basically had no excuses. He was just beaten by a horse that stayed better. And I think the winner's got a bit of scope as well. And I think he's probably a more interesting long-term prospect than Bouverie. And Nichols' other horse ran really well as well. Actually, all yours. He didn't let down the Beltor form. So those who fancied Beltor should have been relatively confident, but he obviously didn't do it on the Friday.
Dave, I think it's only fair we come to you for the cross country with your each way double landing with Polly Peacham in the mare's hurdle and any currency in the cross country. Was all the action pretty much at the second last or third last when the Patrick McCann, the Racing Post photographer, got taken out?
Thankfully I believe is on the mend, which is good to see. Yeah, but at that point, our French friend Mr. Plouguignou having to turn left on Cheltenham route. The horse just runs in the flight, the strength to sort of straighten it up, crashes through the rail. May well have been involved in the finish. You have to think had he stayed on his feet, but race pretty much went as I thought it would do, to be quite honest. The horses that are in the frame are the usual suspects, aren't they? Any coincidence run his race again, as I've sort of suggested before, and I think handicapping matters less on this race. With almost with every passing year, it's all about being able to sort of handle the track, hold track position, and have enough stamina and reserves to come up the hill. And any currency is just down here off, even off 149, which is as high a mark as he's been off for quite a while, that he's still able to operate. And I thought, even though he was getting a great ride from Aidan Coleman, he is a push and shove ride. He's travelled fine to halfway, and then from then on, just got into 1 or 2. And as soon as he gets into 1 or 2, then that's when he needs riding. Aidan's got him jumping beautifully at the mile. Again, got him winging his fence and turning in. He was either Ribard's doors come there to sort of throw down a challenge. I thought you knew any currency would battle on at the hill, so I was delighted to see him in the frame. Uncle Junior, who's jumped far better than he normally does, and this time has been able to hold a bit more of a position back in third. But obviously, we're talking about old horses here that aren't going to be. They're not going to be progressing, are they? It is what it is. The circus race, as they call it in the best way enclosure. I was calling the odds on this one for a bookmaker friend of mine who needed a bit of a help, and they all call it the circus race in the middle. Rivage Door, at just 10, just 10. There's probably another race or two anyway over the fences. The December race will be the interesting one because obviously they're level weights for that one over 3 mile 7, and that might be any currency's best chance of getting his head back in front again. But as I say, it is what it is. The cross country, people don't like it. I don't mind it personally. I think it's a race that's you got 16 runners, quarter of the odds each way, and of 16 runners there's only ever 5 or 6 that you give any sort of chance to. And, as I say, the horses that a lot of people would look at each way were in the frame, so it is what it is.
Well, French accent like that, I think Shouty Man will probably be shaking in his boots in a stint with Miss UK and Claude. What are you on? We'll start with you for a recap of not a recap, but more the performance of the first 2 days. Out of all the winners, or even the placed horses, or even jockeys and trainers, what was the highlight of day 1 and 2 of the Cheltenham Festival?
I will say it's a difficult one to choose from, because there are some impressive performances. I very highlighted Paul Tynan's riding, but Don Polly might just fall through the gaps a little bit as far as this festival is concerned. But I think it's one of those performances, the more you watch him, particularly a close-up from the last fence, the more likable this performance is, and I think he deserves to be to get star billing.
Paul, for you?
Yeah, I'd say the same thing. I very rarely get involved that early for next year's festival, and I thought the 10-1 was way too big as he went past the post, so I've already backed him to win next year's Gold Cup. I'll just touch on a couple of eye catches I didn't get a chance to mention there. I thought, obviously, Petit Swan. I think he'll be an exciting novice chaser. But I thought the 5th home, Volney de ran a cracker under his big weight, and again is one to note next season. And back to the Fred Winter. I think the St James, who came flying home under Paul Carvey, was doing his best work. I think he was a rather obvious one. But back in 6th, Zareb of Dan Skelton's, he travelled well for a long way. I wouldn't be surprised to see him go a bit better at Aintree. He wouldn't be good enough for the Grade 1, but it'd be interesting maybe if he considered giving him entry for the conditionals, 2-mile conditional jockeys handicap on Grand National Day. I had that race in mind as a possible for him, as well as one for the Governor, who won well. At Kempton on Saturday, not sure what mark he was given after that, but there were a couple I penciled in there. But as for the first 2 days, it'd be Don Polly for me as well.
James, star billing for you?
I think probably if Duvan was very impressive, and I think he's going to be incredibly difficult to beat if he goes chasing, which I think he probably will. And maybe have a bias towards Supreme, but I thought that's with so much that's followed that performance, I don't think it's one people should forget about. I totally agree with Paul about Volney de Taille. I've been looking forward to him going chasing for a while. He's such a good-looking big chaser. I think he's a bit of a beast, really, and he ran an exceptional race off top weight in that Coral Cup. I just can't wait until next season, and as soon as there's a sort of JLT market pops up, he's definitely the one I'll be backing. And I also thought that, in that circus race, as Dave called it, the ride Dave Russell gave Rivage d'Or was really exceptional. Just so quiet the whole way through, and when it crashed through the rails in front of him, he did very well to make sure that horse didn't follow them. And then I just loved it when he came into the straight, the way he dived in behind any currents, just trying to get that ounce bit more cover. And that just helped, and I thought it was just a really, really clever ride that wasn't as easy as he made it look, I suppose.
I think the star billing for Gigginstown on that one would have been the vet who looked at Rivage d'Or before trying to sell him, because I think they were on about getting rid of him, and then a couple of months later wins the cross country. Dave, for you, star billing, days 1 and 2 of the Cheltenham Festival.
Well, given the guys have mentioned Don Polly twice, I'll not put him up again. It is obviously a really good performance. The more I watch Ruby's ride on Underso, the more I can appreciate actually what a really good stop-start ride I think it is. Although we're all expecting balls out thing from the word go, didn't happen, but it's still actually a really good ride, I think.
Right, gents. Well, that's part 1 done of the Cheltenham review. As mentioned earlier, we're going to come back later in the week or early next and look at Thursday and Friday, where we've got Vitor, Conagry and more. Thanks a lot, gents.
Cheers.
Cheers.